Greetings, one and all. How are things? This is Fletcher Hamilton. I thought by way of an experiment today, I could change the format a little, if only to make things a little less editing intensive on my end. To that end, I subscribe to the New Zealand Herald application, so I get constant electronic updates on my laptop when stories are published or uploaded. So I thought today we'd review a few Herald articles from the third week of May, 2020. I won't necessarily read them aloud, but nonetheless I will link those articles in the description and provide my commentary on them. The first is Victoria University staff asked to donate salaries to save jobs. So, the University Chancellor, Victoria University, I think that would be Grant Guilford, has invited staff to donate some of their salaries to pay for roles like tutors and residential assistants that might not otherwise be affordable, this coming in the wake of the COVID-19 lockdowns and the resulting financial positions of tertiary education providers up and down New Zealand. I don't know if the Chancellor of Victoria, or indeed the author of the article, Georgina Campbell, I don't know which one of these was the one who designated the proposed pay cuts as an invitation to donate some percentage of salary, and I don't know why it's worded in that way in the first place. It's interesting because is this an invitation, or will it be obligatory? Or is it an invitation that will become obligatory if too few staff willingly accede to the invitation? Because it seems to be that it's a pay cut. So if it's a pay cut, just call it what it is. If it is indeed a pay cut, just call it what it is. A pay cut, not an invitation. And I hope you're not pretending that it wasn't expected, because many people who have opposed the lockdown at every stage since the beginning, people like Peter Hitchens and Sakarit Bhakdi, among others, including myriad doctors who have since been censored or had their videos deleted by big tech, have warned about vanishing jobs, wage cuts, tax hikes, and the invention of new taxes, right up until the most horrific potential measure, the implementation of a capital levy, which is just what it sounds like, a tax on capital rather than income, in which your bank accounts, any monetary assets, your savings therein, any property equities can and would be raided by the government to pay for the economic deficit, which was a result of their shutting down the economy in the first place. So if your house is worth $1 million, as I'm sure it very well might be in Auckland's overpriced market, and the government need to redress the books, and they decide to instigate a relatively small 10% capital levy, then good luck to you in finding the required $100,000 that the government suddenly decree that you owe them. But hey, at least you didn't run the risk of getting a bit of a chesty cough for 1 week. Bizarrely, the COVID-19 pandemic has seemingly crystallized into a paradigm whereby the left demand an indefinite lockdown, whereas the right reject any supposition that any lockdown is either warranted or ethical. And as uni staff are generally inclined left politically, I think it's fair to say, to relate these points back to Victoria University, as long as the staff therein were complicit with the lockdown, then I'm sure they won't mind donating any percentage of their salary to more junior level staff and employees, paying the piper as their policies stand. I'm sure they're not hypocritical by any means. If, like me, and more sensible-minded people, you were opposed to the lockdown, then you have my sympathies. The second story is an absolute ripper. The article is entitled National MP. Social Distancing Rules from St. Jacinda are Rubbish, penned by David Fisher. So, a National Party MP, Northland's Matt King, recently posed for a photograph with his family and friends and some of the staff in the restaurant he was in, out with his family. Later, he posted the image online, where it drew criticism from some sheeple who tried to shame the MP for his disregard of any rules relating to social distancing, as outlined by Cindy Ardern's Labour government. So, in response, Matt King takes the opportunity to absolutely roast St. Jacinda and her rules, and all those who follow her thoughtlessly and worship at the altar of St. Jacinda blindly, as Matt King puts it. It's actually really similar to a story out of America, where this gym in Camden, in New Jersey, opened up in defiance of the state lockdown, and there was a confrontation between the police and protesters. And one policeman stood up and he was like, "We are and were only here for everybody's safety. So formally, you're all in violation of the executive order. Having said that, get in that gym, pound that iron, and feel the burn." I think it's really encouraging when you hear that there are members of government or authorities who are not inclined to abuse their power. On the other hand, the sheer number of sheeple who are really taking the concept of social distancing to heart, and not only letting the Labour government of New Zealand and their bought and paid for media cheerleaders engender a climate of fear, but weirdly using it to both censure and expand their personal spheres when out in public, and then chastise everybody around them for encroaching on their new public force fields, and reprimanding everybody else about their lack of deference to government forecasts. And yet, as Matt King shows us, and the story out of America demonstrates, there are some public administrators who recognize the fundamentally immoral nature of keeping people imprisoned indefinitely and controlling their public movements. So bloody good on you, Matt King, for not only calling out the COVID-19 laws for what they largely are, which is bullshit, but for also not getting sucked into Cindy Ardern's Project Fair, and just behaving like a straight-up valiant human being, socializing with other human beings, and treating every other human being with basic human dignity. The most egregious is the final article, titled South Auckland Cry. New Zealand wants to rebuild, but it's on our backs. This from Simon Collins. This one is going to be difficult because we're focusing on the opinions of some high school students. I don't know how to balance my disapproval of their opinions with the need to go fair on them. After all, they're young, they're high school kids, and they are relatively inexperienced. I'm going to try and maintain that balance, but I might occasionally fail. Anyway, I'm going to quote this a little bit too. So, a South Auckland schoolgirl's powerful cry for equity is getting thousands of shares on social media. The head girl of Aorere College, and I'm not going to name her in this video, she is named in the article, posted, "Our Decile 2 school opened today. Spent it watching people swap leavers notices for CVs, 'cause money is low and mouths gotta eat." So, ostensibly, this girl's contention seems to be that richer parts of town can work from home, but essential workers, by whom she means the Pacifica community, I think, are packing our shopping, driving buses, cleaning classrooms, etc. She also, later in the article, cites rises in domestic violence and being poor as reasons why the NZQA, that is the New Zealand Qualifications Authority, should lower its standards. She continues, every problem of society taught in class can be found in the hood. Don't need a degree for empathy. It's ironic how New Zealand wants to rebuild, but it's on our backs. How? How is the need to reinvigorate the economy ironic? And how is it on the backs of Pacifica communities to any greater extent than anybody else? Is that because you're working in predominantly blue-collar work? And in regard to rises in domestic violence affecting Pacifica communities to a greater extent than anybody else, how is that at the feet of the richer parts of town? Most telling is her advocacy for a South Auckland group called For the Culture. I think that might be named after a song from DJ somebody. For the Culture is spelled for, numerical, the, T-H-A, and culture with a K. I guess that's a little bit of ironic misspelling, which gives it some gangster flavor. With every kindness, because I'm aware I might be failing to maintain that balance between compassion and criticism, as I said I would try to do. With every kindness, is it that society overlooks you, or is it more to do with your desire to rebel against the pre-existing community and even adopt a little bit of hip-hop rebelliousness? Anyway, For the Culture is an advocacy group opposing climate change, but with the underlying supposition that climate change is engendered and exacerbated by capitalism. Because that's the new Marxist tactic, isn't it? It wasn't enough to attack the wealthy via the accusation that wealth is inherently immoral. Not even quite enough to transfer the focus from wealth to race. Now, Marxists attack capitalism by laying it at climate change, laying it at the feet of climate change and pollution, because capitalism makes life too comfortable and convenient and safe. So it gets hard to attack the morality of wealth. It gets hard to attack the products of capitalism that benefit all our lives. So therefore, particularly young people are encouraged to blame climate change on capitalism and link that to race, with their claims that ethnic communities bear the brunt of the byproducts of capitalism. It's right out of the playbook of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I mean, even though communities that are claimed to be disaffected or disenfranchised, it can still access the primary products of capitalism and use it to climb the ladder of wealth. Nonetheless, they have to be encouraged to attack it. They have to be made into foot soldiers, and I really fear that's what is happening with these students in this South Auckland high school. To that end, they're being encouraged to organize school strikes. I'll take that seriously if and when they ever begin to use their after-school or weekend time to protest. Maybe the worst of it, For the Culture claim that the COVID-19 pandemic was engendered directly by climate change, as a direct result of climate change. Okay, For the Culture, here's some science for you. And by the way, I just swapped rooms. The quality of the audio might have changed. Anyway, emerging diseases are usually linked to the alteration or destruction of a pre-existing habitat, or later on when they implement intensive forms of farming on that cleared land. For example, in the 16th century, deforestation of the English countryside unleashed the English sweat. More recently, in the 20th century, urban encroachment in Kinshasa, in Africa, let loose HIV. More recently, mad cow disease, swine, and bird flu were created by intensive animal rearing, whereby the animals are kept in too close proximity to each other. On the other hand, mad cow disease was engendered when cattle were fed bovine origin proteins as an ingredient in their cow feed, which contained prions. Very little to do with the global temperature. I'd go so far as to say nothing to do with it whatsoever. You can link an emerging zoonosis to the alteration of a pre existing habitat, but to link it to climate change directly, it's a bit of a dubious stretch. On the one hand, it is really cool to see high school kids engage in a little bit of activism. On the other hand, I think that their points of content are being misdirected. And I think that there are adults behind the curtains, on the sidelines, who are deliberately misdirecting these high school kids. I would go so far as to say it is pretty indicative of the typical leftist move of indoctrinating kids into being foot soldiers or young trainees for leftist causes. Uh, this girl, the co-founder of For the Culture, I'm sure that she will cry poverty, and indeed, her personal life might be subject to some very difficult conditions. On the other hand, she has been selected to attend a global young leaders summit in America. So, really, I think that she is quite privileged in a way. Nonetheless, I think that these kids are going to be ruined by the lefties and this cause. And it really is quite sad to see. I really hope there are some teachers at that college, Riri College. I hope some teachers there will provide a little bit of alternative insight or balance into their opinions. But I kind of doubt that's going to happen. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up here for today. So, this was Fletcher Hamilton. Have a good one, New Zealand. Take care now.